The first thing we need to do is obviously just create a new project. So I went ahead and did that. I named mine CLI for command line interface, but feel free to name yours whatever you want. So the next thing we're going to do is add in a couple of dependencies into our cargo.toml file. And the first one is going to be called text-colorizer. We'll set the version to 1. And then regex, and we'll also set the version to 1. So just to kind of show you what these dependencies are, text-colorizer is just going to give us a couple of functions to enable and disable coloring. And this is just going to allow us to add some style to our output in the terminal. And then we have our regex crate, which is short for regular expression. And this crate's going to allow us to look for a certain expression in our file, and then we'll be able to change it based on some arguments that we're going to accept in. So this is a very important crate for what our program is going to do. So just to come back and look in here, we see we have regex equals to 1, and Cargo does this really cool thing where crates that have reached a 1.0 version in Rust, they begin to follow semantic versioning. This means that all version 1 changes should maintain compatibility with older versions. So version 1.2 will be compatible with 1.3 and so on. But once version 2.0 is released, then 2.0 is no longer required to be compatible with 1.0 versions. So another thing is, and if you saw this in the regex, we're at version 1.5.4 is the latest. But in here we have it only as version 1. So Cargo also does this thing where if we specify, hey, we just want 1 for the version, Cargo is going to automatically use the newest available version prior to version 2. So this one is essentially equivalent to version 1.5.4. So that's all we have to do in our cargo.toml file. So now we can start looking inside of main. And we can start thinking about our program structure. So our program is going to take 4 arguments: a string to search for, a string to replace it with, an input file, and an output file. So we can keep all these arguments together by grouping them into an arguments struct. And all of our fields are going to be strings. So we're going to have a pattern, which is what we're looking for. We're going to have replace, which is what we're going to substitute in for our pattern. And then we're going to have our input file and our output file. So to help us debug, we're actually going to add in an attribute called debug. So we're going to derive debug, and this is just going to allow us to use the standard output a little better to kind of format how we want to be able to print out our argument struct to be able to see the values associated with our field. So it's just going to help us kind of debug our struct. And now we see that we have a bunch of warnings already for having dead code. So I actually want to suppress these. That way when we output to the terminal, we don't get a ton of warnings outputted with it. I'd like to keep our output to the terminal pretty clean. And that's what allow dead code does. So now that we have our struct set up, let's just go ahead and bring in our text-colorizer, and we'll just bring in everything that's within the crate, which is what that wildcard is going to do for us. It tells it to just, hey, make everything inside that crate available to us. So now we can create a new function, and we'll call it print help. And in here, we're going to use a different form of print line. And it's going to be the ePrintLine macro. And the ePrintLine is going to print to the standard error with the new line. So it is equivalent to printLine, except the output goes to standard error instead of standard out. We should only use ePrintLine for error and progress messages. Otherwise, you should continue to use printLine instead. So in here, let's just start adding in some messages to help the user understand how to use our program. So what is our program going to do? It's going to replace a string with a new string. And then our program, because we put in our curly brackets, it's going to be called find and replace. And then we want it to be green. So that's how we change the color in this case. And then we also want to print out how to use our program. So we'll say usage target string replacement string input file, and then we'll have output file. And that's all we need to do. So let's come up here, let's call our function, and now let's come down here and run it, and it's going to build our dependencies for us. And now we see that we have find and replace in our green text that we specified, replace a string with the new string, and then we see that it has usage, target string, replacement string, input file, and output file. So everything looks good, and everything was printed out the way it should be. So in the next lecture, let's look at how we can take in user arguments from the command line.